you can see everything. So kind of going over how to make the changes, because everyone's biggest thing right now that I've been hearing for quarantine is, all right, well, I have all this free time. I'm going to radically modify every aspect of my life. I'm going to make my sleep on point. My diet's going to be great. I'm going to work out 20 times a day, and I'm going to come out of this completely shredded, right? Everyone's got all these insane goals. Or you have the other end of the spectrum, which is, I'm so stressed, I don't really want to expect a whole lot from myself. So kind of finding that middle balance as to how we're going to start to make changes, and make sure that they're changes that you guys can hold on to even when quarantine's done. Because the worst thing in the world would be to start to make big strides towards your goals and then come out of quarantine and suddenly you start to regress because you set stuff up in a way that's not sustainable. So the biggest thing, and I always talk to clients about this, why do you want to do what you're doing? Because I think sometimes you might find that the why is actually kind of silly and isn't going to help you get through it when stuff gets rough. So I'll give John as an example, right? If John was doing the bodybuilding show and his why was getting likes on Instagram, I don't think that's going to be enough to get him through the agony of having to whittle away at his carbs week by week. You need something that's going to kind of get you through. You need a really strong why, and a why that makes sense for you as an individual. So a valid example, which I'll use myself as an example, I want to change my macros because the scale stopped moving, right? So I have a way of measuring the scale stopped moving. That's how I'm measuring my success. And I want to change my macros because the scale stopped moving. So it's pretty rational. I have some people, and this is kind of joking, but half not. I want to cut out all carbs and switch to only drinking non-GMO alkaline lavender essential oil infused water because Boss Fit Chick Lifter 123 does that and she's ripped, right? So going off of what we just talked about, just because something works for someone and they're getting great results doesn't mean you want to automatically adopt every single aspect of their lifestyle, because sometimes someone might be doing something that maybe they're succeeding in spite of what they're doing, not because of it. Maybe Boss Fit Chick Lifter 123 is actually doing everything really wrong and she's just a weird genetic freak. You don't know. So realize that you don't want to start changing things just because you saw something shiny on the gram. You don't want to start changing things because you're bored. Moving this over, right? So if the changes work, great. They work for your mom. It works for your friend. It works for your cat, whoever it worked for. Realize that it might not work for you. And you don't want to do things just because you're bored, right? One of the biggest issues I've run into is if I'm changing my macros, I don't have a lot else going on. So out of sheer boredom, right, you start to get impatient. It's like watching paint dry, and it's like, oh my God, it's been 3 days and my body weight hasn't changed. What am I going to do, right? Well, give it time. Our perception of time is really, really off right now. Give yourself that leeway to realize, all right, my perception is super off right now. That's okay. But it doesn't mean I can rush things just because I'm getting impatient. And also realize you got to have realistic expectations of what is success, what constitutes success. So for me, I'll give myself an example right now. My realistic expectation of success is half a pound to a pound of wheat coming off of the scale. In the event that the scale were to not move, I also have progress pictures. So I have multiple metrics of measuring success. And that to me is slow and steady, but it's realistic, it's doable, it's something I can sustain. Kind of going off of Brad, I know you mentioned wanting to fill out and wanting to put on more muscle, right? So having an ideal expectation, all right, I tried this diet for a week and I didn't put on 10 pounds of muscle. This diet doesn't work. No, right? Obviously, you realize it takes a little longer than that. So we want to set realistic expectations and be patient with it. So how do you do that? Because I think we all know in theory, all right, be nice to myself. All right, set specific goals. How do you do that? If you guys were here, I don't know if you guys were here last week for my talk on sleep, but we had 3 different columns, and each column had a ton of different information. I told everyone, I want you to focus on one column at a time, right? Everyone's heard KISS, keep it simple, silly, keep it simple, stupid. I like poop head, it's being recorded, so I put the emoji instead. But I think that gets the message across better. Keep it simple. You're not trying to completely disrupt your life and completely modify, radically change everything. Because if you change so many different things, you have no idea, well, what was the one thing that made the biggest difference, right? You want to change a couple of variables at a time. I'm saying 1 to 3. that's still kind of aggressive. So 3 is an example of, the sleep chart I gave you guys. All right, the 3 things I'm going to work on this week are shutting off the lights by a certain time. I'm going to lower the thermostat in my room, and I'm going to make sure that my phone's not near my bed. If you have a simple goal like drink more water, you might only have 2 steps or 1 step. Set a timer, and that's going to remind me to drink my water throughout the day. But notice all those things are super simple. You don't want to add anything else to the mix until these things are mastered. So for Brad, for you, it might be, all right, I'm going to track for the next 3 weeks. And that's all I'm going to focus on is tracking. And I heard you mentioning potatoes, right? And transitioning to whole foods. I'm going to make a conscious decision every meal to have more whole foods, and I'm going to track. And that's it. You're not going to make insane, wild changes until you have that data, because then you can go on to step 2, which is figure out if it's working, what you need to change, figure out if it even needs to change, or maybe you're closer to being on the right track than you think you are, but you need that data point first. And then distance Brad mentioned this in the chat, which is you have to give it time to work, right? I think John is in agreement with the 2 weeks. That's very opinionated. There's no, work to cite on that number, but 1 week is just way too little. 2 weeks is still not a lot of time for a diet or exercise program, but people don't like big numbers. No one wants to hear give it a shot for 8 weeks. So most people can stick something out that they don't really like for at least 2 weeks. And then, once you've given it 2 weeks of honest effort, you can see, all right, well, is this going back to deciding, does it work? Do I need to change it again? Because if you're like me and you get super ADHD about changing things, if you keep bouncing around, you can't fault one thing for not working. You're not sticking to one thing. And I want you guys to realize that big change in results, it's just small changes done consistently over time. So going back to Brad, right? We're going to track. We're going to make conscious choices for whole foods. Cool. Do that for 4 weeks. You're now a pro at tracking, and you're now a pro at choosing whole foods. It's second nature now. You're really good at it. That's one small change. Now we're going to make another small change. And maybe 4 weeks from there, you're going to start tweaking your macros. 4 weeks from there, it's going to be a different goal. And consistently over time, those tiny changes are what's going to get you the results that you want. But you're making those changes through tiny, simple steps gradually over time. The key is the consistency. And you really can't be consistent if suddenly you're like, all right, I'm going to go on these crazy. If you were tomorrow to decide you're going to get shredded and jump onto John's diet, right? That's a massive change, radically different eating style. So we want to do something that's small, so you're not getting that big shock to your system, so you can keep doing it over time. And then you want to set yourself up for success. And this is a little bit of tough love, but realize that if you know, like for me, I don't buy the groceries, but I need to tell them to stop buying Oreos. Oreos are my food, where if there's Oreos in the pantries, I'm going to flip out and I'm going to eat all the Oreos if I'm in a bad mood. And I'm going to feel like crap about myself afterwards. I know it's a trigger food for me. So I should not go out and buy Oreos. If I go out and buy Oreos, I'm setting myself up for failure. I don't want to do that. You want to set yourself up for success. So Brad, that might be for you, stocking up on those whole foods, maybe not having the processed stuff in the house. Or if you're not the one that does the shopping, say to your wife, hey, hide the pasta from me. Please don't make pasta as often, right? But you want to do things that's going to set you up for success. Timers on your phones are a super big thing for anyone that's going to be watching the recording. Hydration is always, people say, I want to drink more water. Great. If it was that easy as just drink more water, we'd all be doing it. What's stopping you? For most people, it's they don't drink water steadily throughout the day. They wait until they're completely parched and they feel like they have sand in their mouth, and then they chug, and it's a catch-up game for hydration. How do you set yourself up for success? Make sure you have some water. Make sure you have a timer on your phone, and maybe every hour and a half you drink an 8-ounce glass, right? You can kind of pick and choose what's going to work for you. But I'm doing something where it's basically creating a foolproof plan. I'm not putting obstacles in my way. You don't want to put things in your way that are going to potentially deviate off of your path. Because if something's not a habit yet, if you haven't made it a change yet, you're not going to be able to resist it, right? If I am, not used to saying no to processed food, and all I'm buying in my pantry is processed food, I have a finite amount of willpower. It's going to be pretty hard for me not to cave, especially in the beginning. So make sure that you're just putting yourself in the best position possible to succeed. Don't sabotage yourself, and don't tell yourself that, yeah, it's fine, I can resist, because I guarantee at midnight you're not going to be able to resist. Chase is emailing me. No, Chase, I don't want to explore my offers. Terrible interest rates. So leaving you guys with this: change is always sustainable steps that are done consistently, and the consistency is key. Realize that whatever you do, and obviously quarantine's a little bit different. I don't know if you guys are still working or not, or what your day-to-day looks like, but realize if you're not working right now, can you continue to do the stuff that you're trying to change right now? Can you do that after the quarantine? You know, Brad might decide, all right, the only way I can get all my food in is if I have 12 meals a day, right? Okay, that's cool, it's working, but Brad, can you do that when you're not in quarantine anymore? The answer is probably no. Most people can't do that working a normal job. You're probably not eating 12 meals a day, but again, wild example, people try to do crazy things in quarantine and think that they can sustain it out of quarantine. 99% of the time, you can't. If your goal's a little bit bigger, right? Like I know for me, actually my goal's not that crazy, right? Half a pound to a pound a week, that's not wild. But let's say your goal is way bigger. You want to lose 20, 30, 40 pounds. You want to set those goals up to be tinier. And this kind of is where the making changes and setting goals is kind of intermingling a little bit, I feel. If something is a massive goal, you're going to feel like you have to make massive changes, right? I want to run a marathon. Okay, well, you can start out by running your first mile and then get on a 5K program and then do a 10K and maybe run 1 or 2, maybe even 3 half marathons. And then eventually you're going into running your full marathon. But realize that the changes and the habits that you build at those lower levels are what let you build those big goals. I'm trying to see what else. Yeah. And then if you're checking in, right, realize that if you're not accountable to anyone, some people, for some things, yeah, we can be accountable to ourselves. If it's something that's super, super important, sometimes we can be accountable to ourselves. But quarantine's kind of weird. We're all in this weird mindset where we're stressed, we're on high alert. It's not a mentality for most of us that's conducive to being accountable to yourself. This is probably one of the hardest environments to be accountable to yourself. Everyone's been through it where you had a bad day at work and the first thing you want to do is go reach for junk food, right? When you're in that crappy mindset, you yourself are not the best accountability partner to yourself. You're probably gonna be a little lenient. You're gonna let yourself relax a little bit. It's fine. I had a rough day. Have the Oreos, Mel. It's fine, right? If you're checking in, if you're being accountable, whether it's Facebook group, whether you have a workout buddy, whether it's your spouse, whether it's a parent, a sibling, whoever it is, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be just the Facebook check-ins, although that'd be great if it could be the Facebook check-ins, because then John can give you some guidance and some feedback. And kind of the group positive peer pressure will keep you on track. None of this stuff is going to be sustainable and done consistently if you're not being gently bullied into it. Because at some point during this, I'm looking at my calendar right now. I have no idea what day we're on of quarantine. At some point, you're going to have an off day. On that off day, do you have a support system in check to make sure that you're going to stay on the path? Because in an environment like this, it might only take that one bad day to derail you. So we want to avoid that as much as possible. And that's pretty much it, is keep it simple, start with a couple things, and make sure that you're being realistic in how you gauge success. And that's something that they're very, very simple principles. Sometimes it takes a little bit of thinking to figure out how you're going to implement that in your life. So for me, for example, I'll use myself as an example, right? I don't have an insane goal. Half a pound to a pound a week isn't crazy, but I can go back and, right, where am I? Right? So decide what constitutes if it's working versus I need to change it again. So for me, I decide that my diet is working by a combination of scales going down and my progress pictures look good. I haven't changed my macros in, I'm going to say 4 weeks, right? So I've given it at least 2 weeks and it's still working. And it's super simple stuff. I'm not trying to complicate everything by trying to change radical things about my diet. I'm adding a little bit of vegetables here. Maybe I'm spacing out my food a little bit differently. Maybe I'm cutting my hydration off a little before bed so I don't get up to pee 20 times in the middle of the night because I have a bladder of a 2-year-old. Tiny changes, but you're not trying to be a rock star and change your entire life at once is basically the gist of it. Let me go back. Cool. So that's pretty much it. It's one of those things that I don't like to ramble on and on about because it really is just something that these are the principles and now you just got to practice it and maybe discuss it a little bit more, whether that means, sitting down with John and talking about it a little bit more. But realize that it comes down to this is the stuff that no one really talks about, especially like on Instagram. You don't see the ads. You don't see a lot of stuff about it because it's not sexy sounding. This is putting your nose to the grindstone and doing stuff day in and day out. I don't have sleep. I had pro tips and little hacks. There's no little hack or pro tip to consistently doing tiny things that sometimes you might not be in the mood to do. Sometimes, I do want the Oreos. I'm sure sometimes Brad does want the pasta instead of the potatoes. What are you going to do in those tiny moments? And are you going to keep fighting those tiny moments where the Oreos are just staring at you is what it comes down to. If that makes sense. I'll give you guys a chance to speak and see if John has anything to add on it.
Thanks, Mel. That was awesome. So let's see if you guys want to unmute yourselves if you have any questions. I just want to kind of show a couple of things that I'm doing currently just to kind of help keep me on track. But I think one thing I'll just kind of add in right away is that you want to try to when we're lifting, one of the things that we always try to preach is like if your PR is like 300, let's get 305. Let's not worry about like getting 405 like once you get 300. So like think about like what that next incremental step is in anything you're doing. So whether that be nutrition, sleep, stress management, whatever area you're trying to improve, like think about like what's like the next incremental step. So if you're trying to improve a habit, I think a lot of us try to go from like, eating McDonald's to like having like this crazy like 6 meals a day, like meal prep, and there's steps in between. And I'm not like perfect either. So I just want to share a couple of things that maybe might like not be deemed as perfect, but it's something that kind of helps keep me on track with some of the things. So what may be like perfect is, for example, just kind of making my own rice, right? So this is something simple. So this isn't like perfect by any means, trying to get the lighting. So I know this is like a minute rice. This is 40 carbs. I know it's 40 carbs. It's very, very easy I don't need to worry about measuring it. Is this as good as just making my own rice? No, but it's kind of an intermediate step and I'm still making progress. That's an example. As I get lower in my calories, so my next progression would be swapping out some of that rice with cauliflower rice again. So I could make this myself, or this is kind of a more convenient solution for me. Again, not perfect. So I have a lot of like pre-portioned stuff. Another thing I have, and then we have, we got some oats here. Again, these are individual packets as well. I don't need to have those individual packets, but it just makes things a little bit easier for me. And then, like we mentioned before about the progression in beef. So this is a Piedmontese. So for a 4-ounce serving, a 4-ounce serving is 3.5 grams of fat. So this is very lean. Okay. So that's like a way you can kind of progress things in terms of that. And then the other thing I would just say is if you're really kind of stuck with like trying to plan out your stuff, just start to write out your day, and you can start to figure out where you can kind of get your meals in, and then you can start to kind of figure out, the specifics later. So that's kind of all I have. I thought that was great. So do you guys have any questions or anything you want to add to what Mel already shared? And I know Lisa just jumped on as well. All right, so let me. Thanks, guys, for watching. I'm going to stop the recording, but I'll give you guys a chance to speak. I thought that was great.